Hey, what's going on, you guys? My name is the Raptor, and I've got some more matchups to review as chosen by you, my subscribers. This series has continued to receive a ton of support, so thank you all so much for that. And please make sure to read the video description before just commenting a bunch of matchups. I promise it'll save you a lot of time learning how selection for this series actually works. But for everyone who's well aware of that already, let's start the review. First up, Hulk vs. Godzilla, Marvel vs. Toho. Before anyone says anything, yes, I am well aware that this was not actually a most upvoted matchup on my community tab, which is normally how this stuff gets chosen. However, I also did not make an actual prediction video for it, despite it being the next actual episode of Death Battle. And I've talked about this in a few places before, but it essentially boils down to everything kind of just felt against me when trying to put this video together, and I realized that I just wasn't having fun doing it. And in my opinion, these videos that I make still need to have some fun element to them because I'm doing YouTube for fun. Otherwise, there's not really a point. However, I still feel a little bad about it, and I didn't want to leave you guys with nothing. So I thought, even if I'm not saying exactly who I think will win and why, I thought I could at least give some opinions on the matchup in general, you know? And that is actually a little difficult for me to explain because it feels like on paper, this is a matchup I would quite like. Like, I do like both of these characters a lot. Obviously, I've known Hulk forever, and I've gotten a lot more into Godzilla a lot more recently, and if you include everything for the debate, then there are a lot of interesting talking points. But I think the best way I can describe it, honestly, is that this matchup just doesn't really vibe with me all the way, and I don't think that's necessarily an unpopular opinion, but it is a little difficult to explain. I do think part of it is how the fight itself would look visually, and also just the connective tissue. Like, I understand that this matchup can definitely work, and I understand why the characters are being paired together, but I don't know, I guess I just look for something a little different in my preferred matchups. And there are definitely some annoying elements as well, especially when it comes to the debate, again, if you're including everything, but it also makes the debate really interesting. So this is one of those weird instances where even though I don't personally find this matchup very fun to talk about, that doesn't mean that I don't think Death Battle should cover it. If there is enough genuine want for an episode, whether by the community or by Death Battle themselves, then a frustrating debate shouldn't really matter, because part of Death Battle's whole thing is that they cover the hard, frustrating debates. This community literally is all about arguing, that's what debating means, so we shouldn't be shunning genuine debatability just because it's not the most fun for some of us to talk about. Yes, it might make the waiting period a little more unbearable, but it is also just a YouTube video at the end of the day, you know what I mean? And I personally feel that I have allowed myself to not dread it by not jumping into the deep end of it. You know, I've made that decision, and it honestly just makes me more excited to see how Death Battle will handle it. I have no idea what to expect from it other than all of the craziness, and all I'll say other than that is that I really do not want Hulk to go 0 wins, 3 losses, but of course, that's not up for me to decide. Moving back to our regularly scheduled programming, Tooru and Wonder of You versus 096, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure versus SCP. This is one of the Death Battle pitched matchups that's been making the most amount of waves so far in the community, for those of you guys who don't know. Now, I'm not aware of all of the pitched matchups right now. I don't even think technically all of them have been revealed yet. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong. But usually when I hear of these big ones, it's like the first or second time that I'm hearing of its existence. And when I first heard of this one, yeah, it was no exception. However, now that I know more about this matchup, I can say that it is definitely unique, and I mostly say that in a good way. To me, this is like the definition of two sides of the same coin. These characters and what they do are kind of opposites, but what their abilities result in is kind of the same. Like, it's really funny to me in that way. And looking at Wonder of You's abilities, like, you know, the calamities and the fate manipulation, it really reminds me of how I saw Gold experience Requiem's powers in Versus Debating, where it really feels like these abilities were kind of just meant to be unbeatable, except for like one or two things that exist within the JoJo's world. And that can sound kind of frustrating, but we're also combining it with SCP, which also just kind of breaks the rules of reality a lot of the time. Yes, it means that there's a lot of interpretational stuff going on, which is definitely going to annoy some people, but honestly, the combination of these series and the characters and the abilities is just so fascinating, too fascinating for me to ignore. This matchup undoubtedly has a really good hook for the big big versus fans. It does not surprise me that this is one of the pitched matchups that's really caught on for that reason. And if anything else, I'm really hoping this matchup proves that saying SCP or other series similar to SCP cannot work on Death Battle at all under any circumstances is honestly kind of silly, because it is really a case-by-case thing, and I think we can agree that even if there are some different ways that we can present this visually, it can be presented visually. It's definitely possible if you try hard enough. And even though I think the debate and the interaction of the abilities is far and away the best thing about this matchup, I still quite like it. I would really like to see how Death Battle handles it and how they decide to present it. I think this is probably like the second or third most likely SCP episode to happen now. I do think that just because a matchup got pitched, it doesn't mean that it is automatically likely to happen, but this one has gotten a lot of attention, so I wouldn't be surprised if we saw it sometime down the line. Next up, Lupin III versus Sly Cooper, Monkey Punch versus Sony. This one seemed to have a spike of popularity for a while, like a couple years back when it was first shown on Death Battle Cast, and while it's definitely settled down since then, it still very much has a presence as a matchup, a lot more popular than it was many years ago. And I've talked about this matchup a couple times myself because I'm always down for different kinds of combatants, in that they may not necessarily be known for fighting first and foremost, but they still very much have the abilities and skills and material to work really well in this format, so I think that is really cool. These characters also have really great personalities and vibes to bounce off of each other. I could see the fight itself being set up like Solid Snake versus Sam Fisher or Lara Croft versus Nathan Drake, where the fight is still very much a fight, but it's in the context of what these characters are most known for, in this case, thievery and such. And I honestly think that this debate has a little more going on than a lot of people seem to make it out to have. Not trying to imply anything major here, but Lupin has his own good stuff, okay? I'll leave it at that. I think it's really nice when Death Battle goes out of their way to revisit classic IPs, and this would be such a great way to do that and to show off just how much these characters have done and how much material they actually have. It may not be the flashiest matchup on the surface, but it is really about the accomplishments, what these characters have done compared to what you would expect from just like normal thief characters. That can make for some really great analyses in my opinion. And I still feel like this one is quite likely to happen. Sly could fight someone else, but this still feels like Death Battle's preferred matchup for him right now, unless they've updated that and I missed that or something. And it also definitely feels like Lupin's best chance for getting on currently, so if they really wanted to bring him on, yeah, I think this would be the easiest way to do it. After that, the Devil versus the Snatcher, Cuphead versus A Hat in Time. You guys know that I love villain matchups, and you know that I'm open to more indie game representation, so honestly this feels like a perfect matchup to talk about on this series. There are some villain matchups like this one that I feel like rely more on archetypal connections rather than pages and pages of more specific ones, but from that perspective, this feels like a very obvious pairing to me. I think this could have a really fun style, like contrasting the crazy evil tone with a more traditional hand-drawn fight. At least that's how I kind of imagine it. There's a lot of fun abilities to showcase in the animation. I kind of see it like Bowser vs. Eggman, where it could be like a hodgepodge of everything these characters are capable of all at once, and showing just how grand they are as villains. And I do like this one, at least thematically, more than, say, Bendy versus Cuphead. To me, this is on the level of like Sans versus the Judge, where it's just a really fitting indie game fight with some of the more popular titles, at least relatively speaking. I will say though that this matchup doesn't seem to be that debatable if you actually know the franchises really well and know how Versus works really well, but I have seen worse examples. I think this is a more excusable lack of debatability because it could still be a cool discussion for the more casual fans of the series, and even for the people who do know the series really well and do believe it is one-sided, if they really want indie games on the show so badly, I don't really think they would care that much, because it is still one of the more popular indie game matchups that could still be a lot of fun to make. However, even though I said that I like this one more than Bendy versus Cuphead, as far as its likelihood, it's kind of like the inverse for me. These series kind of feel like series that Death Battle wouldn't use too many characters from, just based on what they've done before. Like, I could see them just using Cuphead and Hat Kid and then moving on to some other series, but if they did want to go deeper into these worlds, then like I said, this feels like a really obvious pick, so it really just depends on what Death Battle wants to do. Moving on, Serial Designation N versus Penny Polendina, Murder Drones versus RWBY. This is one of the many Murder Drones matchups that seem to be everywhere now. I swear to God, if I hear Uzi's name one more time with yet another opponent, I'm gonna flip a fucking table. And of course, RWBY's been getting a number of ideas for a while at this point. And while I hold to it that this is not necessarily the most exciting matchup from either series, as far as the franchise combination goes, these characters actually work together surprisingly well. I also think this is one of the more agreeable Murder Drones matchups. Like, there are some matchups where it seems like some people really hate them or some people really love them. A lot of them seem to be controversial, but this is one where I think a lot of people can just agree that, yeah, it's cool, it works, it could be fun, and that's pretty much my stance on it too. I think the interesting series clash could make for a really cool fight dynamic and interesting specific advantages that the characters have over each other, and these characters do seem to be pretty big fan favorites. Like, I've seen a lot of people say that even though they want this episode to happen, they don't want to see either of these characters die, and you know, I mean, good luck with that, but I think that what that really means is that people are just passionate about these characters in a really genuine way, and I think that's a really good thing. I would definitely expect this episode to have more character-driven analyses, because these are not going to be huge names to everyone who comes across this video randomly, so Death Battle really has to endear us to them and show off why they have as many fans as they do. And there are some episodes where the writing and the animation can work really well together, like they actively enhance the other section, and I feel like this could definitely work in a similar fashion where you need to watch the analyses in order to get the full picture of the comparison. You can't just skip to the animation. And as far as likelihood, I kind of see this on a similar level as Devil vs. Snatcher, where yeah, I could see this one happening, but I could also see Death Battle prioritizing more popular characters, or at least the characters that are more vocal in these versus matchup discussions, and they aren't using that many web series right now, so I feel like the frequency of that would have to increase the likelihood of this matchup happening, for instance. Not to say it's unlikely, we just don't know for sure right now. Up next, Hanako versus Hu Tao, toilet-bound Hanako-Kun versus Genshin Impact. This is probably the matchup in this video that I have the least to say about. I am not a huge Genshin Impact fan, and I don't really know anything about TBHK. If you like it, that's great. I've heard some good things about it. I just don't know it that well. But what I do know about this matchup on a base level, I definitely think it has some prospects. Just tonally and aesthetically speaking, I think it works great. You have the cute and silly vibes that naturally come with these characters, but they're also associated with the undead, and they're super knowledgeable and super skilled in their fields that unironically make them pretty impressive. I think it's really hard to find such a uniquely fun style like this. I can definitely see why people have compared these characters to each other so often in the past, and I can see why some people think this would really make a good episode of Death Battle. Now, I'm not too familiar with the fight dynamic itself, but the only main negative I've heard about this matchup is that the debate has really only gotten more one-sided since becoming popularized way back when, which of course is kind of disappointing. I do think matchups are better if they're more debatable, which means that this one has just kind of gotten slightly worse as time has gone on. But even still, this would be a very easy way to explore these really cool sides of these worlds, so it really just depends on whether or not you think it's worth it. Is it worth having a more one-sided matchup if it means getting to see a style like this? It could be similar to Devil vs. Snatcher, where a lot of people who like these characters don't really care about the debate because they just want to see these characters on Death Battle, and I'm not really sure if I could blame them for that. Now, this matchup doesn't really feel that likely to me, but I also recognize that could just be my lack of information bias. Like, Genshin Impact is already coming to the show, and a manga series doesn't need to be in like the top 10 most popular series of all time in order to be considered for Death Battle, so I'm not going to say it's particularly likely necessarily, but it could still very well get chosen if Death Battle was really feeling it. After that, Escanor versus Whitebeard, 7 Deadly Sins versus One Piece. This is one of the bigger anime matchups that's been in the community for a while. Not as much of like a legacy matchup as, say, Naruto versus Luffy, but it's still kind of infamous in its own way. It has a shtick that's distinct enough from other matchups to get people on board and to stand out, and I've talked about it a few times, but for me it's always kind of just been like a why not matchup. Like, yeah, why not? Let's do it. It could be fun. This one to me has like a little bit of everything. There's a lot of badass visual potential just for their abilities, what they can do. There's a lot of personality that can be be worked into the banter and the analyses. There's a lot of humor, not necessarily from the characters themselves, but just from the concept of the matchup. Like, such an over-exaggeration of masculinity and manliness, and I mean, come on, look at them, it's just funny. The connections between them, I think, are fine, nothing outstanding, but it's still well-rounded enough in the other elements to get a lot of people on board with this comparison. Now, there is, of course, the annoying fact that there are a lot of people that seem to want more One Piece episodes on Death Battle, myself included, but they also want Death Battle to wait until the manga is finished in like 300 years or something. Personally, I'm not that much of a stickler for using characters from series that are still ongoing. My general criteria for if we should hold off on a character is that a change or increase in their power is very foreseeable, and it's also very foreseeable what that specific change is going to be. For instance, we have Deku at the start of My Hero Academia, who started off very weak, but it was kind of obvious that he was going to become as strong as, if not stronger than, All Might. So it hasn't happened yet, but because we pretty much know it's going to happen, and we know exactly what is going to happen, then yeah, that makes sense to hold off. And other characters like that, I think it makes sense to hold off. But there are some characters where it seems like people just want to hold off because they could get stronger by an undefined amount that we have no idea what it's going to be right now. And again, I'm just not as much of a stickler for that because we can't hold off on every ongoing series or ongoing character, let alone just all the characters in One Piece. Nothing would ever get done if we do that. And based on the characters in the series Death Battle has used before, I don't think that specifically would stop them from doing Escanor versus Whitebeard, but who knows? I just think we cannot put too much focus on that because it could just snowball into something a lot bigger than what we intend. Now, I do not think this matchup is literally inevitable, but there are times where it certainly feels like it. Like, again, this would be a major anime to return to the series and a major anime to be introduced into the series with a very fitting matchup for both of them, and Death Battle doesn't always use the, quote, biggest characters from the series that they use, so again, I'm not going to say it's guaranteed, but I also would not be surprised at all if we got it at any point down the line. And finally, to wrap things up, we have future Gohan versus the Invincibles of the Invincible War, Dragon Ball versus Image Comics. I am so sorry to end a video like this, but I am gonna get kind of mean again. I know, I feel like I've been generally positive for a lot of this video, but I cannot go against how I feel about the matchups that pop up on this series. The one good thing I will say about this matchup is that I find it to be a kind of creative attempt to try to make the original Gohan versus Invincible matchup closer, because I think a lot of people would agree that that is the biggest problem that matchup has. I've certainly criticized it for that in the past. However, I do not believe that this version of the matchup rectifies that problem good enough to excuse removing most of the legitimately good elements that the original Gohan versus Invincible had. For example, the heroic theme that matchup had, that a lot of people would probably agree is the best thing about that matchup, that is completely gone here. The 1v1 fighting prospects and potential, also largely gone. And generally speaking, this matchup is not focused on connections at all. It only exists because it's derivative of another matchup. If you remove that context, or if you straight up don't know it, then this matchup really doesn't make any sense anymore except for some very surface level stuff. And I already don't like matchups where the connection is another pre-existing matchup. Like, I just find that to be really uninspired, but this one just goes way too far in that direction for me. I'm sorry, but it's just too much. It's to the point where I would honestly probably prefer regular Gohan versus regular Invincible over this one, because it just checks off more boxes of what makes an actual good matchup to me, even if this new version is technically closer. Or even if I did prefer this new version, it's certainly not better than any of Gohan or Invincible's legitimately better 1v1 options. Like Gohan versus Ultraman Zero, that's pretty definitively my preferred for Gohan now. For Invincible, it's a little more up in the air. I have been getting more attached to Invincible versus Radiant Black, although I'm not super married to the idea, at least not yet. He does have some other options. But either way, I see no incentive to go with this matchup over any of that other stuff. When you compare it to all the other options that we have, it just feels way too forced to me. And I do believe Death Battle feels the same way. I definitely don't think that this one would happen. Regular Gohan versus Invincible might happen, especially after Omni-Man versus Bardock and the Invincible character won. I could see some people maybe wanting to push for Gohan versus Invincible a little more. Even if I don't personally want it, I have to recognize it might happen. But there is no way Death Battle would have more faith in doing this version of the matchup instead of anything else they could do. I just refuse to believe it. And as per usual, that takes us to the end. To anyone who's shown any interest in my matchup opinions, I thank you very much for sticking around. I hope you enjoy this one. Read the description if you're interested in participating. Like, comment, and subscribe if you want to see more from me. But either way, I hope you all have a great day. I'll see ya when I see ya. Peace out.